Well, hi, it's Professor Foto, and here we are with part 2 about exposure and film. And we're back here looking at Mr. Light Meter again. And we're turning him on, and of course we still have the same setting we had the other day, f1 at 1/1000th of a second. And what we're going to explore today is how all three of these films can be exposed at the same exact shutter speed and f-stop, and you can get three totally different kinds of results because of the film curves that are on these films. The film curve is how a film responds to light. So let's take a look at that. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move Mr. Light Meter over here a little bit out of the way, and we're going to bring in a drawing pad to try and illustrate what we're talking about. Just slide this in, and here we go. Okay, the important thing to remember here is that every light meter, basically when you test it with a reflected reading or an incident reading, is giving you the electronic equivalent of what was Kodak's 18% gray. 18% gray is in zone system equal to zone 5. And zone system is a scale from 0 to 10 f-stops in range. Now, in the modern digital cameras, we can get anywhere up to 14 to 20 f-stops of range. But we're dealing with film, and this is what film will really do. Normally, when we're shooting with film and developing, we are shrinking down this range to fit into that range. And that's what made the mastery of film, especially in the bygone years, in the early days, so important. The other thing to remember is, and we may have talked about this or we may not, but every film has a mathematical film speed, which is to say that f16 equals, with the ASA or ISO, whatever the ASA or ISO of the film is. In this case, let's say it's a 100. Mathematically, under a bright sunny day with sharply defined shadows, the correct shutter speed is 100 in the sunshine. If we go off into the shade, normally the old rule of thumb was add 2 stops. So in this example, we're looking at Mr. Light Meter here. Instead of being at 1000 at f1, we would have to back up 2 shutter speeds, 250 at f1 in the shade would give us the same as the 18% gray card. So this is the sunny side, this is the shadow side. So let's go back and talk about this for a minute. Here's the sun angle. This is just a very basic representative drawing of the highest value, and these are the mid values, and this here is basically 18% gray. So in this scenario, this is zone 5, this could be zone 9 or zone 10. The deal here is it's not about which system works or what doesn't work. There are a lot of fancy systems. There's an exposure triangle, there's all kinds of other things. But in reality, what you care about is this is what your meter is giving you. Whether you're exposing black and white film or color film, color transparency or color negative. When you turn Mr. Light Meter on, this is what he's giving you. And you need to understand that whether you're at 1/1000 at f1, or if you're at 1/15th of a second at f8, under the current situation, you're getting the same exact value created by both exposures. That's what it's going to give you. That's what it's telling you that it is. So now, what we want to talk about is how do you choose to make an exposure? What you have to do is you have to decide what part of this picture has the most important details you want to hang on to. If what you're trying to hang on to is detail in the shadows, then what you need to do is you need to make sure that when you have an exposure, that the darkest value here is not more than quote unquote 2 stops or 3 stops darker. So in deep shade, this value here is probably 3 stops darker. And this may be the 18% gray. What determines this is the fact that it's the highlight value. So in direct sun, it's one thing. You take your light meter and you meter into the shade, and you're going to find out that maybe in reality, this value here is maybe 3 stops or 4 stops lower. So now all of a sudden, if you want this to come out right and hold the details that you want, then what you have to do is you're going to have to set your exposure point based on what it matters. And that's why we said yesterday when we were talking, you expose for shadows and you develop for highlights. Now, the only issue is the fact that regardless of what the light meter says, you can have the right exposure for this situation, for this film. You can have the right exposure for this film. You can have the right exposure for this film. You have the right exposure for this film. The reality is that each one of these has a contrast curve. And that curve is based on a little diagram like this. And what happens is each one of these films has a unique curve, and the exposure point that you're picking is in the mid-range. It's right here. So that exposure point is here. This is what would be the maximum highlight. And that's to the point where it blocks out all detail. It purely whites out. Down here would be the equivalent of a 0 or zone 0 or no value at all. There's no detail, there's no nothing. It's as close to being clear as possible. So the light passes right through the negative when you're making the print. The key is the fact that in this film, because it is a tech pan film, it's also orthochromatic, there's panchromatic. These are each created with a different blend of what they respond to in terms of wavelengths of light. Some are panchromatic, which means they're red sensitive. Others are orthochromatic, which means they're blue sensitive. If you care or you're interested, orthochromatic films were the common film used in the teens, the 20s, and the 30s by most of the photographers that you quote-unquote love and worship today. So you need to understand that. The other thing is the fact that what they don't talk to you about in terms of film is what's called the, let me move this over here, it's called the base fog level. What is that? When you look at a piece of film, this is a 35, let's say, and we've got all our little sprocket holes on the bottom and sprocket holes on the top, okay? And then you have your frame of film in here, your exposure, okay. On the outside of this, you see kind of a darkish clear. That is actually the emulsion that is been through the developer, and it has one value, and that value that it has, no matter how dark or how light it is called the base fog level. The problem with Kodak, or that Kodak developed for themselves over the years, was that over time they started to mess with how they did the formulations on all these different kinds of films, and in the process the base fog level on these things climbed from 0.1 up. And pretty soon, when you look at films like Plus X lost its following because of the fact that the base fog level on Plus X got higher and higher and higher. And because of that, what that meant was, excuse me, that any details that were in very high values here suddenly were lost. The film basically blew out. It whited out. Let's say the densitometry on it got to the point of being completely blocked out. The other thing is the fact that on a lot of modern films that are coming out of Europe, like ADOX, okay, what happens is the fact that they have a very, very thin, almost no fog, base fog level to the emulsion at all. They may be even less than 0.1. And what that does is that gives you a better black here. And because of that, that better black gives you shadow details that a lot of modern films cannot do. Ilford is kind of a balance in between. It does a little of both. They make good products, but their Pan 50 has a tendency to be overly contrasty. But this is, in essence, we want to call this a high contrast film because it can't deal with big ranges of contrast. But it's an excellent film, but you have to expose it exactly right and develop it exactly right. Now, the other problem, TechPen has to have a special developer, and there are other films that I'm going to suggest that you can use now that are as good as TechPen, if not better, readily available in the market. We'll get to that at the end when we talk about some other types of film. What happens is when you develop this film, if you have the wrong point on your exposure curve here, what happens is instead of getting this exactly where you want it in the scene, what happens is if you overexpose, then what happens is you're actually exposing for a deep shadow. Now what that does is that takes this and in essence it moves everything down here up in this direction, but it takes everything up here and blows it all the way off the chart. So in essence you have no detail in the highlights whatsoever. If you meter it right, then the only thing you have to deal with is making sure that you develop it right and you don't over agitate it. And the problem is that when you over agitate something, even if you have exposed it correctly, what happens is it will cause the highlights to blow out and it will cause the shadows to actually go down because they are being over agitated, just like these are being over agitated. So there's several forms of agitation. The least amount of agitation you could do or the less amount of agitation you can do, the better off you really are. So this area here, when you're exposing film, this is called open shade. Okay, because of the fact that here's the sun over here, here's the sun angle, and this is mild shade, open shade, this is deep shade, open shade, and this is the shadow created by the object. So in essence, what you want to do is sample a meter reading here, a meter reading here, and a meter reading here. Whether you do it as incident or whether you do it as reflective, you'll know. When you stand in open sunshine and turn your your incident meter on, you're automatically getting a bright, straight, direct sun reading. Now, if it's cloudy that day and we have little clouds out here, you're not going to have sharply defined shadows. So when you walk outside to shoot pictures, for starters, look at the edge of the shadow. If there is no hard edge, then that means that what's happening is that the value of the sun coming through the clouds has been diminished. Once again, this is the reason that your friend, Mr. Light Meter, is so important, because what he's going to do is he's automatically going to read that reading and he's going to go, oh, hang on here. He's going to go, oh my gosh. Well, guess what? We can only have 2/50th. Oh, we can only have 1/25th. Oh, we can only have a 60th at f2 in bright, direct, quote-unquote, sunlight because there are almost no shadows. So you want to remember that when you're dealing with exposure, film, and development, the choice of film is important. The wider the curve you need here, the wider the curve, the more you need a film that is capable of handling wider tonal values. That means you're going to be looking at things like T-Max, Ilford, there's some Rolly films, there's some other independent films out there that have the ability to handle these wider curves. The better the formulation, the better it is. The other thing is the fact that you'll have to be careful about how you do the development. So make sure that you read the instructions, and there are many developers to choose from while you're out there. And make sure that you read about which developers do certain kinds of things, because there's no one be-all to end-all. I use Xstall for a majority of films because it responds to most films very well. And that developer is made by Kodak, and it works extremely well. But there's also a great developer called Rolly, Slow Speed. You can get this in Europe, you can get it in the United States. This works extremely well for most films as well. And it gives them a more broad, controllable tonal curve. So for the moment, that's what we're looking at. So remember, look at the scene, decide what values are important. Is it the highlight value you want? Is it the shadow value in a face that you need? chances are the shadow value in a face is going to be like this value here. It's not going to be like that value. So what you want to do is you want to look at the range between values, because the range between values, and we talked about this before, color transparency films, if there's more than a 3-stop range, you're going to lose 100% of the detail in the shadows because color transparency films can't handle it. But Tech Pan film has a similar problem, and ADOX has a similar type of challenge also. So you want to look at what the contrast range is, and between the details you want on the low end and the details you want on the high end. And that's really what matters, is the contrast range in your exposure. What highlight details do you want to hang on to? What shadow details do you want to hang on to? And then what you want to do is when you shoot, you want to bracket your exposure. Shoot maybe 1 stop brighter, 1 stop less, or a half stop up and a half stop down, but bracket your exposure. Be willing to take 2 or 3 frames and vary the exposure slightly, so that what happens is when you get to the dark room, you have more than one negative to work with, and you can see which one responded best to your developing techniques. And a lot of this is going to come down to your personal attention to detail and planning. The other thing, like we said before, have a notebook. Write down your date, what the value was when you took your basic reading in bright sunlight, and then look at the basic shadow values for where you are and use that, and slow down. The rule is shoot slow, end up with more good pictures. When you hurry and you rush, it doesn't work. Film doesn't allow you to rush. Digital, you can rush all day long. It doesn't matter. It'll do automatic bracketing for you, do all these other things for you, and at the end you can shoot 20 pictures and then pick which one looks best. Film doesn't allow you that option. Your decisions are permanent. They're carved, quote unquote, they're carved into glass, so to speak. So this has been Professor Foto, and in the next segment here, we're going to talk about the many types of film available to you. We're going to make some suggestions, and then see if we can help you out in that direction. Okay, well, here we are. We're going to be talking about choices, black and white and color. First off, we're going to be looking at the ADOX CMS20. It's a professional film, ultra thin emulsion. It's a very good film to use on an overall basis. Very professional quality, very fine grain. I like this film. I've used it several times. It's a good choice to think of. Next, we have the ADOX Silvermax 100. This is a phenomenal film. It's black and white, and it's an ultra high silver content. It gives you really extreme exposure latitude, ultra clear base. I mean, it's just like pane glass. This is really nice stuff to work with. Very responsive to many developers. ADOX CHS 102. Needless to say, this is a black and white film, and it's running at an ISO 100. It has an anti-halation layer to it, okay, clear base, and it optionally can be done into a reversal process like a black and white slide. ADOX does make a dedicated black and white slide, by the way. This is the Agfa Copex Rapid. This is a film that has some very interesting applications. I have not had a chance to use it very much. You'll notice that this product, like many of the Rolly and Agfa products, are sold through mahn.net. They're actually out of Germany. This film here, Arista EDU, is an educational film. You'll see with a lot of schools. This is a good 100 speed film, and the Arista films are sold only by Freestyle Photo in California. They're a big international distributor. The films of Arista are very, very inexpensive. That's one of the reasons that they're very popular. It comes in a 400 that's every bit as good as Tri-X. And again, once again, very, very inexpensive products. They're about half the price of what Kodak Tri-X would be for this. The other thing about Freestyle is the fact that I don't get paid for talking about these people. I've just known them for a long time. They carry a wide range of developing products. They carry a wide range of bulk film. If you want to buy bulk film, you can buy 100-foot rolls of many types of products. The Foam and Pan 100 is another good example of a 35 bulk film. Buy yourself a bulk film loader. Foam and Pan makes a lot of very good films, and they're high quality. This is an ASA 200, black and white, good style. And the tonal gradation of this is really a subjective thing. That you're going to find there's certain things you like and you don't like, how it treats highlights or how it treats shadows. That's what you're going to look at when you see a lot of these films. But if you find a film that you like, I would highly suggest buying it in bulk rolls and self-loading it yourself. Here's another, this is called RetroPan. Now this is a very interesting artistic style film. It's a 320. It has what they call a soft. It has a softer feel to it. Works very well. A lot of people like this a lot. It's ISO 320, so it's a fast film. It has a very classic look to it. Here we have the Rollei Ortho 25. Now this is a fully orthochromatic ASA 25 ultra fine grain film. Orthochromatic films only see or are skewed in the direction of seeing blue light. In the old days, most films were all orthochromatic. There were no panchromatic films. Panchromatic films were, quote unquote, the new kid on the block. And everybody liked it because of the fact that it rendered blues better. It took a blue sky and rendered it dark. Whereas an orthochromatic will take a blue sky and render it lighter. I have a very well-known picture that I won some awards for of some blue flowers taken in a black and white image, and the blue flowers show up beautifully because they were taken with an orthochromatic film. In fact, they were taken with Rollei orthochromatic, which I like very much. I've used it quite a bit. It works good with a lot of different developers. You can work with multiple different kinds of dilutions. I highly recommend these Rollei films. They're just really nice products. Over here, you'll see a chart which talks about how to work with things, and it talks about different kinds of developers. And you're going to find that part of what you're going to want to do when you're learning to use these different products is study the technical material. Look at what it can do and give you the ability to do. And that's a very important thing that you want to know, is you have to be technically competent. You can't just walk into the darkroom and do just whatever the hell it is you want. Okay, what we're looking at now is the Rollei infrared film. This is a very high quality, high grade 35 millimeter infrared film product. It does amazingly well. It has a very good grain structure. And the other thing is the fact that it is probably one of the most consistent infrared black and white films that I've used. So you can count on it doing what you want, and metering it is an interesting challenge, but it's not difficult to work with. Okay, here we have the chart for the infrared, and it will give you an example of what you're seeing when you're dealing with this. This is something that's really worth knowing and understanding. You see the spectral sensitivity on the far right hand side, and you take a look at the densitometry curve here on the left. This will give you a good understanding as to how this film performs and what it does. A lot of people like working with black and white infrared, and they get some very great creative results. So this is another option for you. If you're in Europe, these films are easy to get a hold of because they're out of Germany. Here's the Rollei Retro 400. I like this film better than Tri-X. I think it has a more original feel to it. I like the grain pattern. Tonal changes on it I like quite a bit, so it works very, very well. You can also push or pull this film depending on the need that you have, and you can get good results. I also like working with the Rollei Retro films. There's a 400 and then there's a Retro 80. They work very well with real glass color filters. Yellows, oranges, reds, greens. They work very well with these things. So it's a very nice thing to be able to work with. The next we have is one of my real favorites, which is Rollei's Retro 80. This is an ISO 80, so it's closer to what the real ISO is on what people used to consider to be ISO or ASA 100 films. This has good quality, good behavior. It holds onto shadow detail real well. And it's not hard to deal with in terms of exposure or development. And once again, it has a lot of latitude. You can push this film, you can pull this film, and you can work with multiple different kinds of developers. That's one of the things that's also really nice about this. You can get most of these films, not all of them, you can get them in 120. Many of these films you can get in bulk 100-foot rolls. If you're in Europe, I suggest that you contact the people at MAN who produce the Rollei films. They're easy to find on the web. They have a good system of also supplying darkroom supplies. They've got a couple new films that are coming out that look very interesting. There's a Panchromatic 400 street film that I've been trying to get a hold of and haven't, that I'm looking forward to testing. The other film that's coming up here that Rollei makes is one of my big favorites, and this is an RPX. Now, RPX, listen to me carefully, is better than Kodak's Tech Panchromatic 25. It is an ultra slow speed, ultra fine grain panchromatic film. So if what you're looking for is a fine grain, slow speed film, it has wonderful lush transitions, very rich feeling tones, this is a great film for you. And because it comes in 35, that means you can use it with any traditional 35 millimeter camera, new or old. It doesn't matter, because of the fact that this will work well with your classic lenses, by the way. So it's going to give you the better image. In those days, film wasn't as good. The drawback on your image was not the lens, it was actually the film. So RPX is a wonderful film to work with, and it does beautiful things to water, sky, and a lot of other tones. The next thing we have down here is the Super Panchromatic 200, and that is a film that is, again, it's similar to RPX, except that it's an ASA 200, so it gives you kind of a mid-speed, high-quality panchromatic film, which, needless to say, there's a real need for that out there in the world. And like I said, my two choices normally for film are the guys in Germany at Man. I buy a lot of film from the people at Freestyle, and easily, because of the fact that I can get developers, tools, I can get printing supplies that are good. It's not that some of the New York stores don't carry film, it's they don't carry a wide selection, and it's not really a market that they're really after, because the bottom line is I don't feel they're really interested in the fine art, quote-unquote, traditional black and white market or traditional film. The other thing to remember is the fact that if you're looking for transparency films, Fuji really is the better of the transparency companies out there. We're waiting for Kodak to come back with some new films, and we'll see how those go when they come back. The other thing I'd like to do while I have a moment here is I'd like to take and give a shout out to a friend of ours from Italy who has just released his first book, and it's out there at Amazon. It's called Lost Time, and his name is Gabriel Rodriguez. You can find it at Amazon. We're throwing up a picture of it as kind of a shout out to help him out. It's his first book. Very talented guy. He's also a member of the Voigtlander Lens Club. So here's a very good, interesting photographer and his first book. So this is Professor Foto saying like us, share us. Please add comments. Please slap the subscribe button because it helps us out quite a bit. And we look forward to seeing you in the very near future. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram. I'm on Instagram almost every day. Thank you so much.